Hello everyone, welcome to our third and final CPD session around memory and metacognition. It started back at the beginning of the year with Carla teaching us about cognitive load, and last time we looked at a bit about metacognition and in particular how we can use think alouds in our modelling. As a reminder, my name is Holly Phelps and today we're going to talk further about metacognition. I hope there'll be something for everyone to take away today. It may be something that's new to you, it may be something you're already doing, but hopefully we can all tweak our practice or perhaps start to do things more deliberately and consistently. I thought we'd start today by following our own advice that we've had in our CPD around activating prior knowledge before we begin our lesson today. So to do this, we're going to do a quiz. Hopefully this will highlight any areas you perhaps might need a bit of further CPD on. So question 1. Which of the following is not true about long-term memory? So A, there is no limit to its capacity. B, the information is grouped into schemata. C, all knowledge in your working memory is transferred to long-term memory. And D, if knowledge is not used and retrieved from long-term memory, it will be forgotten. Have a think. Perhaps you're playing it like a game, or perhaps you're just thinking in your head. And the correct answer is C. That's not true. Things will only be transferred from working memory to long-term memory if we pay attention to them, if we are rehearsing them or thinking about them. There's a quote by Daniel Willingham that says that memory is the residue of thought. So we have to think about that knowledge that's entered our working memory for it to be transferred to our long-term memory. Next question. Okay, question 2. On average, how many chunks of information can our working memory hold? So we have A, 2 to 3 chunks, B, 5 to 7 chunks, C, there's no limit, or D, 4 to 5 chunks. Have a little think about that. Okay, and the correct answer is B. We can store around 5 to 7 chunks of information in our mind at one time. Question 3. Which of the following help reduce cognitive overload? So A, is it introducing material in small steps? B, making links to prior knowledge? C, reducing distractions? Or D, revisiting content at spaced intervals? Which of those help reduce cognitive load? That was a tiny bit of a trick question because it's all of them. So they are all ways that we can reduce cognitive load of the children in our classrooms. Okay, next question. Which of these is not a component of self-regulated learning? So is it A, cognitive load, B, cognition, C, motivation, or D, metacognition? So we looked at this in the last session. We looked at the 3 elements of self-regulated learning. One of these is an imposter. And the correct answer is A. So cognitive load, I mean, we need that in self-regulated learning in terms of like when we're teaching our metacognition, we might think about our cognitive load in terms of creating that metacognitive classroom, but it's not one of the elements of self-regulated learning specifically. Question 5. Metacognition can be broken down into 3 stages. So we looked at this last time as kind of like a cycle and the 3 stages that you go through as you're doing a task. So is it A, planning, evaluating, rehearsing? B, activating prior knowledge, monitoring, evaluation? C, planning, monitoring, revising? Or D, planning, monitoring, evaluation? I'll try and make this one a little bit harder. Can you remember what those 3 steps are? The correct answer, D. So we go through our planning stage. We think of those questions. How am I going to approach the task? We then monitor as we've made that plan. After we start that plan, we start thinking, is this plan working? Do I want to adjust my plan? And finally, when we finish a task, we might evaluate how we have done so far. Final question. Question 6. To improve our students' metacognition, we should A, teach the processes of planning, monitoring and evaluation. B, activate their prior knowledge. C, model our thought processes aloud using our think alouds. And D, set an appropriate level of challenge. Which of those things would help improve our students' metacognition? And the answer is all of them. They're all things that we need to think about to improve students' metacognition. If you were doing that quiz and you found there's some things you were a little bit unsure of, I've shared this with your facilitators. So there's a few ideas here for how you get further CPD on each area. So if you were a little bit unsure on the sort of memory, just the idea of how working memory and long-term memory works, there's a really cool YouTube video to watch there that will give you some more information. If you'd like to know more about cognitive load theory, there's a link to something you can read, and there's also a link to the guidance around metacognition for more information on those. So I've shared those with your facilitator so you can ask them if you would like them. Okay. So just a reminder, last time we talked about the fact, why are we doing this? So we talked about the EF evidence, how it's a strong evidence base, and the fact that it's a low cost implementation. So it's something we can do at low cost to change our way of teaching, change our approach, to just maybe adjust and tweak. And it's meant to have a really large impact on the children, especially those learners, those ones that we find maybe on the cusp between working at or greater depth, or on the cusp of different levels, perhaps in secondary. This is something that can really improve their understanding and help them to become self-regulated learners if we teach these skills. I'd first like to take some time to share one of the case studies. As many of you know, I've been visiting your schools, observing lessons, speaking to students, speaking to staff, to get an idea of what it is that we're doing really well across the trust and how that can be better shared. One thing I would like to share today is something I saw when I went to the Boswell School and spent some time there, which was really interesting. So, first of all, the EF recommendations around memory and metacognition, the second recommendation is to explicitly teach children those metacognitive strategies. And that includes those ideas of how to plan, how to monitor, and how to evaluate their learning. One thing I really liked when I saw in the Boswell School was that this year they've implemented that recommendation by first giving their staff CPD around metacognition, but then also giving children CPD. They've been basically teaching the children more about this, more explicitly, during their workshop Wednesdays. So this is time during form time. And for the autumn term, the first autumn term, they focus solely on developing children's understanding of metacognition and those processes of planning, monitoring, evaluating, getting the children to think about lessons or things that they were doing and how they would use those processes. So I thought that was a really powerful way of getting the children using that vocabulary more and increasing that level of metacognitive talk. So that's something, if you wanted to know more about that, then I'm sure I can share more with any school about that. So please let's contact me if there's anything you'd like to know more about that. I could put you in touch with those people that created this fantastic resource. So I wanted to start with recapping what we did last session and just making sure that we remember what it was that we talked about. So to begin with, one of the things we looked at a lot at is this 7-step model for explicitly teaching metacognitive strategies. And it talked about this sort of 7-step lesson and how metacognition is embedded in each part. We particularly focused on that modelling stage. So we looked at the modelling stage and we looked at this cycle, the planning, monitoring and evaluating. And we talked about how we can, as we model, verbalise our thought process. And that's something that's really powerful to the children. If we do these things automatically as we're expert learners, that's not apparent to all of our learners. So showing us, asking ourselves questions and thinking to ourselves, how would we do this and how would we approach it? And then starting to model and asking ourselves those monitoring questions will help allow children to see those unconscious processes, and it helps them to become explicit. There should be a handout for you that if you with these last 2 slides so that you can see those and have a physical copy of them as well. Okay, so you've been listening to me talk for a little while now, so I'd like to give you some time to talk amongst yourselves. So I thought it'd be good to start with our talk task. So working with your year group partner, or if in secondary your department, I'd love to gather some feedback on what we've done so far. So I've got 3 questions and you should have a feedback response sheet which you can record your ideas in. So the first question is, since the last CPD session, what have you implemented or tried to do more consistently? So it could be the idea of those metacognitive think alouds, perhaps you thought more about the planning, monitoring, evaluating, perhaps you thought, actually I'd like to do a bit more of this and this reminder today has helped me, but there's a good discussion for you to have with your team. I'd like to know what has worked well. Is there anything you found, actually I found this really effective, I really noticed a difference in my pupils? And finally, what difficulties you face? Is there things that are tricky about trying to implement some of the metacognitive research? Are there things that you are unsure about, would like to know more about, that can help us plan like future CPD? So this is a good time to pause the video and take time in your teams to discuss this for however long you need. That brings us to today's focus. So today we're going to look at recommendation 5, which is promoting and developing metacognitive talk in the classroom. Last time we more thought about our think aloud and how we model metacognitive talk. Now I want to look more at the dialogue we have with our students. So on the screen in front of you, you should see an example of metacognitive talk in a Year 4 science lesson. So I'd like you to pause here, read this through, you may have it as a printout as well, and think about what you notice. So how is the teacher developing that metacognitive talk? What do you do in your own practice, in your own classroom? What do you notice? Hopefully you've all had a chance to look at it now and to discuss it. Maybe there's some things you notice, maybe this is familiar to you. Perhaps you think, oh, that's something I could do more of. So just to talk through this example, so the teacher in this example helps pupils to understand how to construct a branching key and the cognitive strategies needed. She also encourages them to discuss what they found hard and to think in advance about what could go wrong. All the time she's guiding and probing thinking, getting people to listen actively and respond. And as you can see, classroom talk can build that knowledge and understanding. In this example, the pupils share both their awareness of strategies and of how hard they found it, so their knowledge of the task, how hard they found it in the past, and they're using that metacognitive talk to further their understanding and further their learning. I'd like you to pause here as well and think for a few moments about this question. How do each of you promote metacognitive talk? How do you build it into your classroom? So have a little think about that for a moment. Okay, perhaps you thought of things like talk partners or talk tasks. Perhaps you thought about self-evaluation activities. I'm wondering, how do you ensure that these methods are promoting children's self-regulation and that the students see the value in them instead of just another activity to get through? Because I think some children could be guilty of thinking, I just need to do this for the next bit, How do we get them to really see that value in that metacognitive talk? That's just a bit of food for thought now. We'll now look at some of the EEF guidance of how we promote the metacognitive talk through our questioning. So you may have another handout of this, but here are some examples of the sorts of questions you could use to get children to think metacognitively about their learning. Last time we looked at this cycle, but more in terms of us thinking aloud, whereas this is more about teachers and LSAs asking these questions to pupils directly. How could you use these types of questions more deliberately and consistently in your lessons? So thinking about as you're planning and the children are planning what they need to do, perhaps they are talking to their partner, how you go around and question them and develop that metacognitive talk. Whilst your children are working or students are working at their tables or desks, what you're saying to them, what questions you're saying to them, if they're stuck, how you're prompting them. Those monitoring questions can allow them to become more independent learners and self-regulate. And finally, how you evaluate tasks, how you use that plenary perhaps effectively to really build children's metacognitive understanding and help them increase their self-regulation. I'd now like to look at some more examples of metacognitive talk in the classroom, and some of these will be really familiar to us, and I guess it's getting us to really think about our practice deliberately, what we're doing and why. So first of all, metacognitive questions for mini plenaries. There's some examples here of how we can use it with our Bloom's taxonomy, the sort of creating, evaluating, analysing type questions. So are you using those mini plenaries effectively to develop children's understanding of their self-regulation, to help them to think metacognitively, and how that dialogue is perhaps carried out in your classroom? So there's an example here, so you can obviously pause that and have a look at that if you'd like to. Some other examples. Something I think a lot of schools do, like a KWL grid, and how we use that effectively, how we revisit it at the end and talk about what we've learnt. That really giving them the onus of what do you already know about this topic, what do you want to find out, I really like it at the end that when we go back to our what I want to know questions, we say, oh, have we found out the answers to these then after our topic? Is there anything we need to do further? So that's an example of building that metacognitive talk, so a nice simple example. Some other examples here on the screen, so you can pause this and read them through. Self-questioning techniques, encouraging that critical evaluation, considering bias, perspectives, goal setting, reflection, lots of examples from art and music as well. So perhaps you might want to pause there and have a look at some of these things. I'm sure there's some things you're already doing, but perhaps you could do that more in lessons, or perhaps you could do it more deliberately, or think about the types of questions you might ask during these activities to really promote that metacognitive talk. There's another example of application I'd like to show you now, and this was from the Durrington Research School. So we're going to look at a Key Stage 4 and a Key Stage 3 example. So first of all, it's on the board here. So this is a student self-review task which they complete as part of like a post-assessment feedback routine. They decided to implement this, as I read through the research school's information, because of the EEF guidance. They'd read about that metacognition guidance, they'd seen that part that says, get learners to think about their own learning more explicitly. And you can usually teach them to set goals and monitor and evaluate their own academic progress. So they explained that most students, including those with even high starting points, need a lot of support with this. So as a team, they came up with a way of getting the children to do this more. Now, they were already carefully narrating their own thought processes, but they wanted the students to be able to articulate their own reflections more effectively. And people in general find it hard to be critical of their own performance. So it should come as no surprise that the children require a lot of support from us as they attempt to diagnose their own traits as learners alongside any knowledge gaps before putting these down in writing or communicating them and committing them to action. In the blog post, they discussed how spending time with a student to help them unpick and articulate precisely perhaps why they dropped 2 marks on the format questions and what to actually do to address this is so much more effective than just giving them their paper to flick through and have a look. So I think here you can see how children would be becoming self-regulated learners and how this would enable them to really critically evaluate themselves. I know they said they felt like this document gave them space to really reflect. It gave them space for this to happen properly. So this was an example from Key Stage 4, but they also shared an example here from Key Stage 3, so a different example, so more of a like tick box, I did not revise. I like this part here, like, oh, what did I use to help me revise? So it really gets them thinking about, actually, how did I do and why was that? Like, is it because, you know, I just don't know it, or is it because I didn't put that effort in? And that's really putting the onus on them to think about their strategy and their plan going forward. If they're not happy with how they did, how are they going to plan their revision going forward? I thought that was a really powerful and interesting way to do it. This led me to thinking about a lot about things in primary school and what we do. So first of all, some of the things that we do in lots of primary schools, and we spend time at the end of our lessons and our plenaries getting the children to evaluate their learning and their understanding. So this is an example from Bewley here from the primary. If we have our learning question and success criteria, at the end of a lesson, we encourage the children to reflect on which success criteria they felt like they achieved and which ones they didn't, and it helps them to think about perhaps what it is they need more help with if they need to come back at a different time, perhaps in an assembly time, to practice that skill more. Which part was it they didn't understand? We also do a lot around our literacy. So with our writing, we have implemented something called Revision Road and Editing Station. So in the Revision Road section, it's quite interesting. So they'll finish their completed piece of writing and they'll read it through in mind of the success criteria that piece of writing might need. So we always begin a topic by looking at the features of that text type and looking at what ingredients it might have, but also what effect we want to have on our reader and what's the purpose of that text and who's the audience. So the revision road is really about reading through your work and deciding, do you think it meets the purpose? If so, how? Why? Do you think it's suitable for your audience? Have you created the effects on the reader you wanted to have? And that really enables them to critically reflect on their writing. And then it enables them to improve it because they can think about the things that they haven't done or the things that maybe aren't the way they want them to be, that don't quite match their purpose, don't quite match their audience, and it enables them to edit their own work in that way. Also thought about something that I think lots of schools do is having that kind kind of thing that helps children be more independent. So even something like the 5 Bs helps build like children's metacognitive talk. So they're thinking to themselves, what do I need to use? I'm not sure, I'm stuck. And teachers can obviously help guide that. So which of the 5 Bs have you used so far? Have you thought in your brain? Is there anything on the board you can check instead of just always going straight to, I need help from somebody? But if they do ask for help, you can ask them if they've gone through their 5 Bs and enable them to reflect on, are they being a self-regulated learner? Something else I thought was quite interesting was the idea of having like plenary sentence stems. Things like, today I learned, I can now, I understand this, but I still don't understand this, and really reflecting back on their learning from the day. Another idea we've got here is the zone of proximal development. So you can see here that this is like a 3 tiers. So you can use this with students, and the idea is that children will be able to decide which sort of layer they're in. So what things that the learner cannot do, the things that they can do unaided, and that middle part, which is where we're teaching them, that zone of proximal development, the things that they can do with guidance. And the idea is they might start on the outside, like, I can't do this, and then they might move to the middle as we guide them and teach them and model, oh, I can do it with your guidance, and then with the practice and rehearsal, move into that middle part. It's a really visual way to get children to think about their own learning and their own regulation and where they are and how they can move between those steps. So that brings us to the end of today's CPD session. I hope some of those examples were useful. It's really today thinking about what we're going to do in our own practice to be more deliberate, to be more consistent about using that metacognitive talk with our children. So my takeaway task is this. So with your teams or year group partners or departments, discuss an upcoming lesson or unit. How will you promote metacognitive talk more? So could you plan in some of those planning and monitoring evaluation questions for you and an LSA if you have one to use? Could you include more self-review? So there's examples from the Key Stage 4, Key Stage 3 end of assessment ones. There's examples of like plenary self-review. How would it work in your classroom for your students? And perhaps how could you create a routine, something that becomes something you teach your children that almost just becomes natural, so that children start to do it completely on their own because it's something that you do day in, day out that becomes their own internalized thought process. So that's the takeaway task for today. So perhaps you might want to spend some time now and there is somewhere for you to record your initial ideas for your facilitator to send on. So just to say thank you again for listening. Thank you for engaging in today's CPD. Thank you for allowing me to come into your schools, allowing me to come watch lessons and to really gather an idea of what it's like across our whole entire trust. I put my email address on the slide because if there's anything you would like help with for your school or for your team or any advice or anything I can do, then please don't hesitate to contact. If you would like more CPD on something particular, please let us know. But thank you very much and thank you for listening. Goodbye.